Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I am your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very, very senior professional from the US, Mr. Paul Falcone. Paul, welcome to the show.
Good morning, Ashutosh. It's my pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Paul is the principal consultant of Paul Falcone Leadership Consulting, LLC, based out of Los Angeles and Chicago. Paul is the former Chief Human Resources Officer of Nickelodeon and Head of International Human Resources at Paramount Pictures. He has held senior HR leadership roles in entertainment, healthcare, biotech, and financial services. He is the author of 15 books published by HarperCollins Leadership and the American Management Association, and is a regular columnist for SHRM's HR magazine. Paul is also the principal of Paul Falcone Workplace Leadership Consulting, LLC. Paul, what an incredible journey. Before I start talking to you about what you're doing now, tell me about your journey and some of your learnings.
Well, my journey just took a turn last month. What was interesting for me, Ashutosh, was I decided after 3 decades in human resources that I was ready to open my own consulting firm.
Okay.
And that took me about 5 years to prepare for it because I'm used to getting a steady paycheck and the benefits. And the idea of going out on my own is something that scared me. But I think as part of, the whole COVID great resignation, or in my case, the gray resignation, as they call it, I just decided life is too short and I want to give back. I want to teach more. I want to write more. Those are the things that I love. That's the passion. And so my thought was, I'm probably 5 years out, 7 years out before I need to retire. But I want to use these years to build my practice, my consulting practice, because I hope to work until I'm 90. So that's my goal.
Why not? Absolutely.
Right.
So, you've told me that you've started your consulting practice, but today I want to talk to you about your vast experience in human resources.
Please.
When I started working in '79, the HR leader was the personnel manager, and the person who managed the factories was the industrial relations manager. And the only time someone went to the personnel manager was at the time of the payroll.
Correct.
The HR function is a key C-suite role. Based on your experience, tell me, how has this role evolved?
It makes sense. When we were a manufacturing-based economy and everything ran on its own, we had supervisors who made sure that the machine belts worked appropriately. But basically, if there was a people problem, it wasn't addressed. Or if it was addressed, it was pretty serious, almost like someone needed to be terminated.
Correct. Over
time, we switched from being a manufacturing-based economy to really more of a service-based economy. And with that, providing the services are the new widget, so to speak. So the people are the product that you're managing. And ultimately, you have to do different things to keep people happy. There's an expression that says, happy cows produce more milk.
Correct.
And it's true. It's true. And I think there was a natural evolution. And the one function that really took advantage of that, or really was called upon to build on that human capital element, was the HR department. So it grew over the last 30 to 40 years fairly significantly.
Very interesting. And, there is also a lot of use of technology in HR. And I've seen it evolve with the companies that I have run or built or worked in. I'd love to get your thoughts on how is technology changing human resources?
Not as quickly as you would think as of right now at this point in time, but I think it will be exponential over the next decade. So I had just written a book, Ashutosh, that came out in March, and it was called Workplace Ethics.
Okay.
And the idea of ethics is really looking at the decisions behind so many of the changes, and artificial intelligence is right at the top of that list. What's been happening in marketing, with digital marketing, to the point where they know consumers' individual preferences, is moving over to human resources, so that people understand the people element in their organization, just like marketers understand who's buying their products. coming from the entertainment industry, the best example I can give was there used to be 3 networks in the 1950s, and they called it broadcast. And then in the 1980s, they came out with cable, so people could watch channels that were strictly on fishing or cooking or whatever you like. That was called narrowcast because it was specific to an audience. Okay. By the time we got to the new century, we have monocast, which basically means because of the digital world that we're in, you could look on the internet for a pair of shoes today, and over the next 3 weeks, you're going to get little ads about, did you buy your shoes yet? And would you consider these shoes? That evolution that we've seen in the marketing world, in the advertising world, is coming to the human capital world. And if I may, I took a look at my notes from when I was doing my book. And in my book, we talk about the metaverse, the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, digital twin, blockchain, 3D modeling, virtual and augmented reality, robotics, machine learning. This is the future. Right. It really is. And it's going to go very, very quickly now that it's got traction. It's got its footing on the human capital side of the business world.
And yet, I've been speaking to many people on artificial intelligence, and there is this huge discussion on the ethics of artificial intelligence. But I think you can give me some thoughts if you have them, or we can take in some other discussion.
No, I think you're absolutely right. The problem becomes artificial intelligence cannot replace human judgment. And the issue that you have, and we are seeing it already, is that there can be an adverse impact on people. It's unintended. It's the law of unintended consequences. But if the technology is basically saying, as an example, in the United States, every hire that the algorithm recommends turns out to be a white male. That may not have been the intention when they set it up. Correct. But you can't just set the technology free and let it run. You have to make sure you monitor it. There's the ethical implication. And unfortunately, there will be many, many lawsuits in the future where law firms in the United States are going to say that there was an adverse impact against, for example, females or against people over 40 or against minorities, because your own technology screened them out artificially. And that wasn't fair. And that therefore causes lawsuits. Now, that field of law is not very big yet. Right. But if you want to put your money on a field of law that's going to be growing, that's the one. So it's interesting to see.
Fascinating. So moving on, Paul, we've just come out of the pandemic. And of course, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the other reactions of the pandemic. But as a very, very senior HR leader, what would you say have been some of the key HR challenges because of the pandemic?
Well, just to give perspective, for me, Ashutosh, I was in the last 5 years, I was the Chief Human Resources Officer for what's called the Motion Picture and Television Fund. Oh, wow. What it is basically a retirement facility for entertainment industry people. Okay. So when you think of independent living and skilled nursing and memory care, that's basically where I was working. But that was also ground zero for COVID, because COVID started in the United States at a retirement facility in Seattle, as I recall. And these people, because of their age and their other health challenges, are the most vulnerable. So it's been very, very intense by us. In 2020, we had lost probably a dozen of our residents at our particular organization, as did many others. We lost several of our employees that year too. Standing up various kinds of isolation units and quarantine units and whatnot. It was very healthcare driven. And people became exhausted very quickly. And it's funny, but it's now almost exactly 2.5 years later. And it's still a matter of what part of the campus is green versus yellow versus red. Because there could be active COVID or someone tested positive, but they're asymptomatic, but you have to make sure everyone's isolated. Yep. There was an ongoing sense of trying to take care of everyone, despite the fact that people were so lonely and so isolated. So that's the residents. Now move to the employees. Many of the employees were basically required to work remotely. Correct. If you're a hands-on practitioner like a nurse or a doctor, you have to be there. Yeah. But if you're the IT department or you're the finance department, they basically didn't want you on campus. They wanted you home. And I think the funny thing is, I didn't even know what Zoom was when it first came, when we first hit COVID in March of 2020, I hadn't heard of Zoom. It was the best just-in-time technology on the planet, and it allowed people to work remotely, but there were still significant elements of isolation and loneliness.
Fascinating.
It's one other thing I'll share though, Ashutosh, this is important. I learned something. I was listening to one of our doctors give a lecture at one point, and he was basically saying, you know, we work in a retirement facility. You would think that this generation is the most lonely and the most isolated. It's not. Gen Z, the 25 and unders, that's the most isolated and the loneliest. Now, again, Gen Y and Gen Z are the most studied cohorts in world history. We know what these generations want. But as they study them, what they realize is this generation, because it's so tuned into technology, was not very tuned into social elements. And it only made it much worse because of the remote. So a lot of changes very, very quickly. Exponential change in the world of human resources through COVID.
Amazing. Let's now talk a little bit about the Great Resignation. It started in the US, and I think it's now affected the entire world. And HR leaders are worried about it, about the implications. Tell me your perspective of the Great Resignation, and do you see this continuing?
It's a great question. The simplest way I put it is I think every once in a while, God rattles our cage and make sure we realize this is not a dress rehearsal. You better pay attention. And a lot of people said, I'm so tired of doing what I'm doing. And I'm looking at people, over 1 million Americans died from COVID. I think more than 6 million people in the world died from COVID. Other people suffer from long-term effects of COVID. People realized, I don't want to do what I'm doing anymore. I don't know what I'm going to do, but it's not this. And you can fill in the blank. In my world, it was nursing. People said they no longer wanted to be a nursing assistant or a nurse, and so a lot of people moved out of healthcare, and there was this scarcity of talent. We couldn't find anybody, and that's still a problem. But it's not just happening in nursing. It's happening with bartenders and people who wait tables and people who cook at restaurants. They just don't want to do what they've been doing. Well, the challenge we have is as an employer or as employers, we always want to hire people who have practical hands-on experience. Well, the people who have hands-on experience aren't doing this anymore. So part of it, Ashutosh, honestly, I think the idea is because there's been such labor scarcity and such demand for jobs, people have sat back. People have said, I'm not going back to that. In many cases, they were able to get extended unemployment in the United States, and they took advantage of that. But the markets are changing. And now preparing for the next recession, there could be layoffs. Once that happens, people are going to have to go back to get jobs again, even if it means doing things that they didn't want to go back to, didn't want to return to. I think there's a normalcy there, that everything will revert to the mean over time. It will come back.
Great response. Thank you. And yet, Paul, there is this entire move towards the gig economy, which really is, you know, me working in 3 or 4 different places. I'd like to ask you about the gig economy and what are its implications for employers?
Not good. When you think about the gig economy, the idea of being an entrepreneur over your own career, right, and being able to manage 3 and 4 different employment relationships makes it very, very difficult, I think, for employers to find stability. Now, oftentimes, even in healthcare, there's an anchor job, and then people work additional jobs, pick up additional shifts to make more money. And that becomes a challenge for employers unless you're the anchor. If you're the anchor, you're getting 40 hours out of people. Other times you're getting 14 hours, and that's just not enough. So I think that's a change. The other thing, though, Ashutosh, where this is going to me is you're seeing a lot of companies out there that are springing up, sprouting up, basically trying to capture this economy, making it more seamless in different employers so that the employers can join this company. The company is the employer of record. And literally this third party agency will send 1 employee to this company and 1 employee to that company, but they'll cover the person's benefits. and they'll cover their wage and hour issues and everything else. So I think the technology is going to make it that we have to make benefits more portable.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just the technology, it's also the way the businesses are being structured these days, is to facilitate these kinds of changes, because the changes are coming. And wise employers will be first to experiment with these changes and get on top of it, as opposed to making believe that they don't exist. Those employers are going to be caught shorthanded at some point in the not too distant future if they're not careful.
No, great, great response. But yet there is this constant niggling doubt in my mind. Every large organization or every organization needs a young individual who works their way through the ranks and reaches the so-called corner office. If everyone becomes a gig worker, what happens to succession planning? What happens to leadership in organizations?
It's funny. I think the movement towards gig workers is really going to expand, but I don't think it's going to replace traditional corporate.
Okay.
Corporate will still be there. It's funny. I had done a webinar for a group in Vietnam, and this was in Ho Chi Minh City and Hanoi. And the challenge they had sent me their data before the webinar or before the podcast. And they said with the Gen Z 25 and under crowd wants, and these are both high-tech cities, these are high-tech hubs, is they want two things. They want, number one, more career and professional development. They want, number two, less communication with their bosses, primarily through IMing, as opposed to having to talk to the person. And I laughed and I said, listen, I understand your research and you're asking them what they want, but that's the equivalent of asking a 13-year-old, do you need more parenting or less? They're all going to say, I need less parenting because I'm a teenager now. Thank you, Dad. I don't need any parenting. What they don't realize is they need more parenting now than they did when they were 3 months old. And I think that's really the disconnect out there. The younger generation is saying, I want less connection with my boss, but I want more career and professional development. Where's the career and professional development come from? It comes from your boss. So those relationships are there. And companies will still always have the brand name recognition that people will want to work there. If the gig economy increases, and I think it will, I don't think it's going to replace the corporate piece. I think the corporate piece will just be more challenged. There may be tighter talent markets out there. There's just going to be not as many people to choose from. But we exist and we will reinvent, and we've always done it and we'll continue to do it across the globe.
Absolutely. That I agree with you. So one more question relating to HR, and then I'll move to your books. We did speak a little bit about the Gen Zs, and I'm from the baby boomers generation. But
me too.
Okay. So my question to you is, given the fact that, and I have a lot of respect for millennials and Gen Zs, given the fact that now getting into leadership roles and they have a very different way of thinking. As one of the tall HR leaders from the US, what are the challenges in managing expectations of millennials and Gen Zs?
The biggest challenge to me is there's not enough communication going on in the workplace. Remember that we know that the Gen Z cohort is the most lonely and the most isolated in history. What we've lost our ability to do, Ashutosh, is to sit around the campfire and have the elders pass wisdom down to the younger generation. We don't do that anymore. We don't have time. We've got too many electronic things going on. We're all looking at our iPhones. My message over and over again is we need to connect between the elder generation and the wisdom that it has and it passes down, and this younger generation, which is bucking it. I look at my own kids. I have a 31-year-old daughter and a 28-year-old son. And when we go shopping at the grocery store, they don't go to the line where the human being scans and registers what they bought. They go to the machine. And I say, why don't you go talk to the nice person who's over there who's got nothing to do right now? And their answer is, Dad, it's just quicker to do it this way. And that's the best example I can give. The generation is losing its socialness. And that concerns me. And I think that in the workplace, if there's one thing I would focus on, it would be opening those lines of communication, holding weekly staff meetings, holding quarterly one-on-one meetings with your employees, not to talk about operational things, but to talk about how they're doing in their career and how you can help them and be that mentor and be that coach and help them prepare for the next move in their career progression. You will very quickly become someone's favorite boss.
Absolutely.
And you'll also be wise to do that because we know that career and professional development, much like we saw in Vietnam, is one of the top 5 things that these generational cohorts want. They want corporate social responsibility. They want diversity of thoughts and ideas and people. They want work-life balance or work-life flexibility or work-life control. To sit back again and say, no, COVID is over. Everyone back to work. I don't want to hear that word again. Is very tone deaf to me. And employers that are going to do that, and there will be many actually, I think are going to be missing the point. What both younger cohorts want is noble. What they want is good. We should be doing that for them. And the resistance I feel sometimes from our generation, from the boomers, is, well, no one did that for me, so I'm not doing it for anyone else. And that loses the perspective of selflessness and selfless leadership.
Correct.
So,
thank you. Great response. Paul, let's now move to your books. You've written 15 books, and they've been published by some of the leading publishers in the world. Tell me about your first book and what kept you writing, and maybe a little bit about your latest book.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, interesting, Ashutosh. I didn't know what I was going to do when I graduated from UCLA. I had my bachelor's and my master's degrees in German. I'm Italian, so it's a whole long story there. Okay. But there weren't really many jobs at the time for people who had German language background. So I went to an employment agency, a recruiting firm, and I asked them to help me find a job. And they said, well, why don't you work for us? And I said, okay, what do you do? I ended up staying there for 6 years, and I became their director of training. But I wanted to get into human resources because those are the people we were selling to. And to me, the best way I can prove that I was, quote unquote, one of them was because I had my master's degree and I'm a good writer. I said, let me try and publish an article. So I started writing articles and I got bit by the bug. And after about a dozen articles, I was writing for one of the magazines owned by the American Management Association at the time. I asked them if they could present this book idea to their book publishing side of the house. And that first book got the green light, and I haven't stopped. About every 2 to 3 years, a new book has come out, knock on wood. So it's been going very, very well.
Fabulous. And as they say, the rest is history. So
the rest is history.
Well said. Well said. And a little bit about your newest book.
Yeah, the funny thing is that HarperCollins said to me, Paul, we want to write a book that's going to be like 5 books in a set, and it's all about the talent management lifecycle, from how to hire them, how to motivate them, develop them, grow them, coach them, how to hold tough conversations, how to discipline them, how to terminate them. We want it wrapped up in workplace ethics, and we want a special edition just for new managers because that's really where we sell so many of our books. So the new book series, they said, was going to be called the Paul Falcone Workplace Leadership Series. And I said, wait, my name is the title? I was really flattered. It was very exciting. So that book came out, and it's meant to be a standalone series. They're fairly short books. These are 125 to 150 pages each. They're not like the 300-page ones that I've written. But the idea of that is to build that muscle. And the funny thing, operational leaders, Ashutosh, so many times in our country, even if they have an MBA from a top school, even if they've worked at corporate, Fortune 500 kinds of companies, they don't learn about leadership in the trenches. And so many of my books have not focused on what to do, but how to do them. So, 101 tough conversations to have with employees, how to be respectful, but hold people accountable, right? Then books on 101 sample write-ups for documenting employee performance problems, whether it's a performance problem or a conduct challenge or an attendance and reliability issue. This is what the documentation needs to look like. Okay. Those kinds of books, I think, were what's missing out there. Because you can read the books that say, well, sexual harassment consists of X, Y, and Z, which is interesting to know, but you can't do anything with it. Correct. I would rather give the reader a speech on how to motivate your team and make sure they don't go down that road. So those are what most of my books are about.
Fascinating. Paul, I've got time for one more question. And this is for the many, many people who will listen to our conversation. Based on your incredible journey, what would you say are 3 lessons you would want our viewers and listeners to take away?
That's wonderful. Okay, so thank you. The one book that I had written on new managers for this new series was called Mastering the Big 3 Principles of Leadership, Communication, and Team Building. Okay. because I think everyone needs to get better at that. And it's not just for new managers. I know people who are senior VPs and executive VPs and presidents who are not necessarily good at that. So that's one thought. The second thought is selfless leadership. I'm a big believer, Ashutosh, in everything that I've written, that what you want for yourself, give to another.
Yeah.
And as long as you're coming from that standpoint, everything aligns. But the most important thing for me, if I've given you two, my third is always gratitude. Talk to your employees about what they have to be thankful for.
Yeah.
When people come from that standpoint of appreciation and thankfulness and gratitude, they see the world a certain way. Its opposite is not enoughness. There's not enough time. There's not enough money. There's not enough systems. There's not enough love. There's not enough whatever. And they're always looking at the negative. And that's one of those conversations that I've always had with my team members, because it's so important that they see the world through that prism. Because the expression I use is change your perspective and you'll change your perception. What I mean is, if you change the way you look at it, you'll still experience the same outcomes physically in the physical world, but you'll appreciate them. You'll see them differently. And that's really the key. I think that's where the wisdom lies.
Fantastic. Paul, on that note, thank you so much for speaking to me. Thank you for your 3 amazing lessons. What I learned when we started speaking was the 3 types of broadcasting, narrowcasting and monocasting. I had no idea about it. Educating me. Thank you for talking to me at such length about the human resources function, how it has evolved, how it is changing. And what was absolutely fascinating for me, and I'm sure for a lot of our audience, was your perspective on what it will look like with the metaverse and the artificial intelligence and so many other factors of technology that will influence our daily lives. Thank you also for speaking to me about your books. Thank you once again, and good luck.
Thank you, Ashutosh. It's my pleasure.
Thank you for listening to The Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for The Brand Called You.